Hello, I'm Paul Alovitz, and I'd like to talk to you about my course, Psychohistory. It's an introduction to something I'm passionate about. I've devoted my professional career to first to history and then to psychohistory because I was able to get so much deeper in my understanding of the human condition. I took my degrees, doctoral degree and so forth, as a historian, but I couldn't get to understand things that were essential to my quest for knowledge. So I trained as a psychoanalyst for 8 years and practiced for 3 decades. And bringing together these fields not as psycho in history, but as a merger of psychoanalysis, psychology, clinical work of all sorts with the arts and humanities, because my concept of psychohistory is quite broad. Now, I'm passionate about this field that I've devoted my life to. As a matter of fact, I was surprised recently, given a medal at Lincoln Center of Fordham University, where we've been having meetings for the last 6 years, and thanking me for 50 years of bringing insight to people. That's from the Fordham Institute. My passion is spread to others, and you'll feel it hopefully in my course. Let's talk about the first class, Introduction to Psychohistory. The focus is on empathetic listening and the search for the unconscious repetition compulsion in both patients and historical subjects. This course is organized around what would be of greatest interest to clinicians and anyone who's curious about getting into the depths of the human situation of our consciousness. We look at what's good and bad parenting and the difference between high ideals, of which there's so much in society, and say the high ideals of childhood advocates, Alice Miller and Lloyd DeMoss, and their realities. I happen to have known both. Alice Miller only a bit. I, like so many others, was so appreciative of this Swiss psychoanalyst work, advocacy of better care for the child and her work against child abuse. And I read her books, and I used her chapter on Hitler in my Hitler and the Holocaust class. Then when I met her, I found her to be a strange woman, very restricted. And recently I've been able to learn where this restricted quality comes from. She was born a Jew in Poland, but she could pass as an Aryan because of her good Polish and her looks. But while she was hiding, she was identified by a fellow member of a group who happened to be pro-Nazi. Yeah, he's a Polish pro-Nazi. There were a fair number. Anti-Semitism was rife there. And he decided he wanted her in his life, always holding over her head the Damocles sword that he could expose her as a Jew. So she married him. After the war, their child was subject to the abuse of this anti-Semitic father, of his half-Jewish, by Nazi standards, child, who has written and helped put together a film about Alice Miller and her conflicts. And it's fascinating how this woman can do so much to help others, to improve child rearing, to fight child abuse, but not protect her son. Now, Lloyd DeMoss is a case of somebody who who suffered child abuse, growing up as a child prodigy in Michigan. Um, his his businessman father would bring out the leather strap with the metal hanging from the end and hit him. And Lloyd was determined that that would not happen to others. He cared profoundly about children. As a GI in Korea, he felt so badly for those orphaned and abandoned children who were hiding under bridges. And he determined he would study childhood throughout history and wrote a wonderful chapter, The Evolution of Childhood, in which he covered childhood throughout the history in the West overwhelmingly, and divided it into different categories. He loved to categorize things. He saw psychohistory as science. I see it as art that uses science whenever we can, scientific approach as rational human beings. But he wanted to create a perfect childhood and worked to raise, especially his first child, Neil, as someone who would not face the traumas of life. And he influenced a fair number of people who wanted to greatly improve childhood. There's so much to be said positively about him, even if his reality was he struggled like we all struggle with our past. And he once referenced, I slipped and 5 times I hit Neil. And here he organized his life so much about protecting Neil. And so there's such interesting materials there from a very creative, devoted person. Now, in our second class, we move on to listening to the unconscious and developing a methodology. Just as we have a methodology as clinicians, as psychoanalysts, whatever sort of clinical approach you take, focus will be on listening to the unconscious and learning how to make it conscious. This is so important for clinicians and those aspiring to be clinicians. And in this, the mechanisms of defense, what's commonly called coping mechanisms, are so important. They were spelled out by Anna and her father Sigmund Freud. Splitting, regret, repression, projective identification, reaction formation, so forth, are such important defenses. And the different levels of defense. Denial is a low-level defense that blots out reality, at least momentarily, in our consciousness. And what we do as clinicians is we listen to the patient and listen to their defenses. And psychohistory is like listening to the patients. It's a bottom-up rather than top-down process. The focus is always on the patient, not on the theory. The theory is for the back burner. That was one of the issues I had with the boss, because he more and more led with theory, and rather than leading with the facts, which as a historian, I and so many of my colleagues were geared to listen for. Okay, in our third class, we go into psychobiographical approaches and materials. Psychobiographers are like psychoanalysts in digging deeper into the lives of subjects, but also going to broader questions, such as psychological relationship between the leader and the led, such as in looking at an individual as we looking at a patient, what's the environment that he's in? What's the context? I've been doing psychobiography for my entire career, and I will provide to students some famous individuals such as Lenin, Hitler, Stalin, Putin, Lincoln, JFK, Nixon, LBJ, the Clintons, Obama, and Trump, if there's this great desire, that they can then, we can not focus on all of these. We can focus on some. But what do you look for? How do you search for the important events in their formation? And how does that relate to dealing with your own patients or your own life, the life of people you care about and your family, your friends? Those things are so important. Our fourth class is devoted to the human search for the other, to war, peace, conflict resolution. It is so easy for humans to find the other, to be feared, hated, and even killed. That groups and individuals inclined to define themselves as being not like that other person, or, of course, often to identify with positive traits of others. But this class is focused on the negative elements. We look at the literature of hatred and the insufficiently known literature of inhibitions on killing, which was followed from Army studies, because the Army, in the heat of fighting against the Nazis on the Western Front, the US Army discovered that 80% of the soldiers were never even firing their weapons because of the effectiveness of the inhibitions on killing. Of course, these inhibitions had nothing to do with fantasy killings. The fantasy killings in our mind, oh, I'll kill him, I'm so angry. The fantasy killings in the movies, the fantasy killings on television, on all the screens we see, are endless, but they aren't reality. Oh, they can be for a very small percentage of the population, 1 or 2% who are sociopathic, psychopathic. We also will look in depth between the relationship between suicide and homicide in our gun-obsessed United States, which has had such an incredible problem with killing. I was saddened in yesterday's news when somebody in Texas, where you don't need a permit to have a gun, and you can hide your guns in the face of having bandits stealing from him, took out his weapon and fired at the bandits, instead killing a 9-year-old sweet girl sitting in her car, in her parents' car, driving by. What tragedy. And the greatest number of those who are killed are from suicides with the availability of guns, or accidentally killing a relative or friend because you've been drinking too much on the weekend, or you become frightened. Having lots of guns around is overwhelmingly a very negative thing. It's why the United States has such an incredible problem in death rate, despite our wonderful emergency room medical system. In our final class, we conclude with the challenges to our society and the triumphs in psychohistory. Technology has changed and stressed our politics and society. As celebrity is confused with achievement, democracy is threatened by information transmitted through separate echo chambers. Falsity is confused with truth. And there's a real struggle to keep rationality and our democratic system in place. The bright future of psychohistory is based on its ability to deal with these problems, but especially on not simply on psychopathology. If you're looking at some of those people who've done so much negative to the world, but rather at those who are creative and innovative. And looking at those people and all people, as I also look at my patients. I looked at childhood, creativity, empathy, innovation, personality, humor, how people overcome trauma, how we can get more women as healers into our society as leaders, as business leaders, as political leaders, as psychohistorians, since psychohistory has been far too masculine an endeavor, though we've had some wonderful women, but in terms of percentages. In the course, I will be encouraging autobiography and psychobiography. Colleagues who take the course who want to share some of their autobiographical experiences or autobiographies they're writing, wonderful. That's encouraged, not necessary, but encouraged. Anyone who brings a psychobiography to the course and their work in psychobiography, however rudimentary, I'm happy to work with and even use to class at points. I tend to teach through discussion, through Q&A, rather than through pure lecture. So if you join us, it'll be a very good thing. And I look forward to helping you and helping you apply these ideas of psychohistory to your patients, if you're a clinician or studying to be a clinician, to your lives, to those you care about around you. And it will be very nice to have that experience. Thank you. Goodbye.